It didn't start with a cartel, not with a million-pound shipment, not even with automatics. It started with a sawed-off shotgun. October 2017, a quiet raid on the north side of Nottingham. Officers entered a house expecting nothing special, a routine check. But behind a bedroom closet door, they found it. A shortened shotgun, real, loaded, functional. It wasn't flashy, but it was lethal. What no one realized at the time was that this wasn't just a gun. It was a lead, a thread. And pulling that thread would unravel one of the largest weapons and drug cases the region had seen in a decade. The shotgun was just the beginning. A week later, a man was arrested with 2 handguns hidden in his car. Then came a heroin stash in a rental flat. Then a cut-down cannabis grow buried in a basement. Phones with no contacts but endless calls. Cash stacked in shoeboxes. Powdered drugs measured by the gram. It was too clean to be street crime, too structured to be coincidence. Each location revealed another layer. A counting machine next to a bag of heroin. A burner phone with a wiped history. A room with nothing but scales and heat-sealed bags. This wasn't random. It was a system. Every tool, every room, every person played a role. And behind it all, police started hearing one name, Craig Moran. Not loud, not obvious, but always nearby. He didn't make threats. He didn't show off. He coordinated. A quiet presence, invisible to most, but central to everything. He didn't need to touch the drugs. The people working for him did that. He didn't carry guns, but he placed them where they needed to be. The further police looked, the more they saw the outline of a man who ran things from the shadows. And so began Operation Encyclic, a full-scale investigation into a criminal network so disciplined, so deliberate, that even detectives didn't know how far it went. It started with a sawed-off shotgun. It ended with nearly 100 years of prison time. But in that first moment, nobody knew what they'd found. Not yet. Craig Moran's crew didn't look like a gang. No graffiti tags, no matching colors, no street-level turf wars or flashy intimidation. From the outside, they looked like regular people. A few worked delivery jobs. One ran a small side business. Another stayed off the radar entirely. But beneath that quiet surface was something far more organized. A criminal network built with discipline, structure, and silence. There was no yelling, no wild behavior, no random recruits. Everyone in the inner circle was vetted. Relatives, childhood friends, girlfriends, trusted drivers. As Judge Audie would later say in court, he chose people he trusted. Moran didn't build a crew, he built a chain, tight, intentional, and controlled. He ran the entire operation without ever needing to raise his voice. He delegated, but he also oversaw. He knew when drugs were moving, where the cash was stored, who was in charge of transport, and which phones needed replacing. He didn't need to be on site. His instructions traveled faster than his name. There was no headquarters, no office. Communication flowed through encrypted channels, rotating SIM cards, burner phones. Cash was broken down into manageable drops. Guns were kept off-grid. Drugs were moved in increments, kilo by kilo, in sealed bags with clean prints and no chatter. Cannabis was for cover, cocaine was for profit. Heroin was a risk they calculated daily. Each product had its route, its buyer, its packaging, and each step was designed to leave no trace. Moran's network functioned more like a supply chain than a street gang. The difference? Their products destroyed lives. Weapons weren't for intimidation. They were insurance. They rarely used force, but they didn't need to. The silence did the job. The money kept people loyal, and those who stepped out of line, they simply vanished from the loop. This wasn't chaos, it was order. Dark, invisible, and it worked. Raid after raid, the truth became clearer. This wasn't just drug dealing, it was a logistics system. One car search revealed 2 handguns wrapped in cloth beneath a false lining in the trunk. Another house raid turned up a shortened shotgun tucked between a mattress and bed frame. A basement yielded a fully equipped grow room, stripped down only days before. One kitchen cupboard held a full kilo of heroin. In another address, blocks of cocaine were stacked beside scales and heat sealers. Everything was compartmentalized. Phones were blank. No contacts, no messages, just activity. Devices auto-wiped after each session. SIM cards were rotated weekly. One raid uncovered a shoebox full of unused prepaid phones, still in packaging. Nothing was left to chance. There were scales that measured to the hundredth of a gram, high-speed money counters like those used in banks, a handwritten ledger marked with codes, letters and colors tied to customers, weights, and prices. Every transaction logged, every gram accounted for. Police seized over 13,000 pounds in cash. It wasn't in safes. It was hidden in vases, stuffed in couch cushions, tucked inside shoeboxes. Each bundle counted and wrapped. One room was used solely for packaging. On the table, gloves, zip bags, measuring spoons, and lines of powdered narcotics laid out for weighing. It looked more like a back office than a drug den, and that's what made it dangerous. The operation wasn't sloppy, it was professional. The gang didn't improvise. They followed a structure. Every step, every roll, every piece of equipment served a clear function. Weapons were never displayed, but always accessible. Not for show, for protection, not to intimidate, but to secure routes and silence problems. Cocaine moved in bulk, heroin moved in shadows, and cannabis was just a distraction, a cover operation to normalize power usage and chemical smells in rented flats. They weren't hustlers, they were operators, and this was a system, not a crew. As the operation unraveled and safe houses were raided, Craig Moran vanished. Not in panic, in precision. He didn't wait for an arrest. He didn't move money through relatives. He just slipped out. First through France, then south. Within months, he was spotted in Marbella, a luxury coastline. Flashy cars, easy money. He blended in, changed phones often, avoided cameras, kept conversations short. He was seen once, in a club, talking with another British national linked to an overseas trafficking ring. A few days later, he disappeared again, quietly. Word spread of a violent dispute, possibly over money. Then the trail went cold. Investigators tracked him through third-party payments. He didn't have bank accounts in his own name, but the people around him did. A short-term rental, a money transfer, a digital footprint. That's how they found the link. A transaction flagged in Dubai. He'd moved, swapped Europe for the Emirates. In Dubai, people didn't ask questions if you paid in full. For a while, he felt safe. He kept low, used aliases, lived through apps and cash. But the British authorities had already issued an international warrant, and the moment he checked into a hotel under his real name, whether by mistake or arrogance, they got him. The extradition process was short. He didn't fight it. In March 2020, he landed back in the UK. No press, no words, just shackles. He looked down as officers escorted him through the airport. Craig Moran returned not as a ghost, but as the key figure in one of Nottingham's most structured criminal empires. And now the walls were closing in. The courtroom was full. After nearly 7 years of investigation, it was time for justice. 10 defendants stood trial. Craig Moran at the center. He didn't look around, didn't speak to the others. His expression was fixed, firm, detached. Not frightened, just resigned. He knew the end had come. Prosecutors laid out the full blueprint. Drug routes, gun stashes, coded phones, stash houses, burner accounts. Every detail was backed by hard evidence. Photos, transcripts, audio files, and seized equipment. It was all there. Every link in the chain. Craig Moran never touched the drugs. He never carried the cash. But everyone who did followed his orders. The structure ran top-down, silent, disciplined, efficient. Judge Michael Audie KC was clear in his sentencing. This wasn't just a group of criminals. This was a model. You handpicked people you trusted, family, friends, partners, and built a cartel where everyone knew their role. It wasn't chaos. It was infrastructure. He called them a parallel economy, one that operated quietly beside the legal world. Drugs were the product. Cash was the fuel. Guns were the insurance. Moran received 24 years in prison, the longest sentence handed down. Others got between 3 and 16 years. Combined, the gang faced nearly 100 years behind bars. But the length of the sentences wasn't the only point. It was what they represented, the dismantling of a machine, a network that could have expanded, franchised, evolved, had it not collapsed under its own traceable weight. Officers later said, "This was the most organized criminal structure we've seen in years. No noise, no ego, just function." The trial was over, but the ripple effects had just begun. Bestwood, a quiet part of Nottingham, brick houses, public buses, families going about their day. To most, it looked like any other working-class neighborhood, but underneath that surface, a second economy had taken root. Not on paper, not with contracts, but with rules, with discipline and fear. For years, while residents lived their normal lives, the Bestwood Gang operated silently. Cocaine and heroin didn't just go to club dealers or back alley users. They reached school zones, university flats, suburban homes. Each bag of heroin meant a risk of overdose. Each gram of coke, a life veering off course. And behind it all, a supply chain built to keep going, no matter the cost. Weapons were part of the business, not for flash, but for control. Sawn-off shotguns, hidden pistols, rarely fired, always nearby, meant to protect supply lines, to silence problems before they spread. Even if no one pulled the trigger, their presence was a message. This was not a group you crossed. Moran's system worked because it didn't shout, it whispered. It paid well, it avoided drama, and in doing so, it thrived in the open, camouflaged, inside everyday life. Rental flats became labs, burners replaced conversation, and each piece of the puzzle fit without ever drawing attention. To law enforcement and local authorities, this case was a warning. A model like this can reappear, somewhere else, under another name. And if it does, it might be smarter, leaner, harder to catch. Because when the demand stays high, someone will always step up to supply it. The Bestwood Gang is gone. Craig Moran is behind bars. So are the others. Nearly 100 years of prison time handed down. The court is closed. The sentences delivered. The weapons destroyed. The money gone. But the question lingers, did the system vanish with them, or did it simply go underground? What Moran left behind wasn't just wreckage, it was a blueprint, a method, a playbook, how to recruit, how to store, how to grow cannabis without leaving a trace, how to move heroin across a city without triggering a single alert, how to disappear, how to control without being seen. His network proved that crime doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be smart, quiet, clean, and if done right, nearly invisible. That model can be copied somewhere else, by someone else, with fewer mistakes, less ego, tighter leaks, because those who watched Moran fall, they're already taking notes. And next time, the structure may look the same, just sharper, faster, harder to trace. So the question isn't whether this story is over. It's whether the next one has already begun, and whether anyone will catch it before another shotgun appears in another bedroom closet.